We live most of our lives without realizing how much of what we do is on autopilot. We wake up in the same way, check our phones in the same way, take the same route to work, talk to the same people, respond to challenges in the same tone, and solve problems in the same predictable pattern. We think we're making new choices every day, but if we're honest, most of our days are simply repetitions of yesterday with minor variations. It's like we're tracing over the same outline again and again. Maybe the colors change slightly, but the picture remains the same. And here's the tricky part: patterns aren't bad just because they're patterns. Some patterns help us. They bring stability, keep us grounded, and create a sense of rhythm in life. But patterns can also become invisible cages. They can trap us in loops that keep us stuck in the same results, the same frustrations, the same missed opportunities, year after year. What's even more dangerous is that these cycles are often invisible until they hurt. You don't notice them when you're in the middle of them. You think, that's just how life is, or that's just how I am. But slowly, quietly, without announcing themselves, these patterns begin to cost us more than they give us. Sometimes the first sign is frustration, a dull, constant sense of, why does this keep happening to me? You find yourself in the same kind of relationships that drain you. You keep running into the same problems at work, even when the job changes. You keep promising to change a habit, but somehow end up back where you started. It's not bad luck. It's not coincidence. It's the pattern playing itself out. And here's the most sobering truth: you can't break a cycle you can't see. That's why awareness is so powerful. Awareness is the moment you step back from your own life and notice the repetition. It's the moment you stop blaming circumstances and start seeing the common thread. I once spoke with someone who had switched jobs 5 times in 6 years. Every time they left because of bad management or a toxic environment. And in every job, the same frustrations followed them. At some point, they began to realize the pattern. Different companies, different bosses, same feelings. That moment of recognition was painful because it meant the problem wasn't only out there. It meant they had to ask hard questions about themselves. And that's the first step to breaking any, not running from it, but naming it. Naming the pattern is uncomfortable because it exposes us to ourselves. We like to think we're constantly evolving, constantly improving, but the truth is, most of us are recycling the same behaviors in slightly different packaging. Until we shine a light on the pattern, it stays hidden, and anything hidden holds power over us. Awareness doesn't come from distraction. It doesn't come from scrolling, from business, from noise. It comes from stillness. It comes from paying attention. It comes from asking, what keeps repeating in my life and why? When you see the pattern clearly for the first time, you can't unsee it. That's both a gift and a burden. A gift because now you have the opportunity to change it. A burden because now you can't pretend you didn't know. You can't keep blaming the world without also taking responsibility for your role in the loop. And here's where most people get stuck. The moment they see the pattern, they underestimate how strong it is. Patterns aren't just habits. They're grooves in our brain carved over years of repetition. They feel natural because they've been rehearsed thousands of times. That's why breaking them isn't about sudden, massive transformation. It's about conscious interruption. A conscious interruption is when you catch yourself in the middle of the loop and do something, anything, differently. It could be as simple as pausing before you respond in a way you always respond. It could be deciding to listen instead of defend. It could be declining an invitation you'd normally accept, or speaking up when you'd normally stay silent. The size of the action matters less than the fact that it interrupts the sequence. Think of it like a record player. The needle is following the same groove over and over. If you want a different song, you don't smash the whole record player. You just lift the needle and set it down in a new place. One small shift can change the track entirely. But here's the challenge. Breaking a pattern isn't a one-time event. It's not like you see the loop once and then you're free forever. The old grooves are still there and they're comfortable. Your brain will try to pull you back to what it knows, even if what it knows isn't serving you. That's why the process requires consistency and patience. It's not a quick escape, it's a steady rewiring. Some people wait for life to break the pattern for them. They think, once I get the right job, then I'll change. Or once I meet the right person, then I'll be different. But that's not how it works. If you're in the same mindset, the same habits, the same reflexes, you'll carry the old pattern into the new situation, and the cycle will begin again. New setting, same story. The real shift happens when you take ownership before the external circumstances change. You decide, this stops here, this stops with me. You may not know exactly how to rewrite the script yet, but the commitment to interrupt the loop is already a form of change. Sometimes breaking a pattern means going against what everyone around you expects. Maybe your family has always handled conflict by avoiding it, and you're the one who chooses to start honest conversations. Maybe your workplace has always rewarded overwork and burnout, and you're the one who decides to set boundaries and protect your health. You will get resistance, People are used to your role in the old pattern, and when you step out of it, you disrupt their comfort too. But here's the thing, when you break a pattern, you're not just changing your own life. You're sending ripples through every relationship and every environment you touch. You're creating a new possibility that didn't exist before, not just for yourself, but for others who are watching you. Patterns, when left unbroken, can stretch across generations. Families can pass down not just traditions and values, but also fears, coping mechanisms, and limiting beliefs. Sometimes you're not just breaking your own cycle, you're breaking the one you inherited. And when you do, you create a new inheritance for those who come after you. That's why awareness is such a turning point. The moment you see clearly is the moment you have a choice. You can go back to the loop and pretend you didn't notice it, or you can decide that this day is different. That this is the day you lift the needle, even if you're not sure exactly where to drop it next. And here's the beautiful part, the first step you take outside the loop doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to feel graceful or certain, it just has to be different. Once you've proven to yourself that you can act differently, the cycle begins to lose its power. If you've been feeling stuck, pay attention to what keeps repeating. Not just in your circumstances, but in your reactions, your thoughts, your choices. Notice the language you use with yourself. Notice the roles you keep playing in other people's stories. Notice what you tolerate, what you chase, what you avoid. Every repetition is a clue. The truth is, the day you break the pattern is rarely a dramatic moment with fireworks and fanfare. It's often quiet, it's often uncelebrated. Sometimes no one even notices but you. But that small, quiet choice is the crack in the wall. Over time, that crack becomes a doorway. So maybe today is the day you decide to see clearly. Maybe today is the day you interrupt the loop. Maybe today is the day you choose not to do what you've always done. Because the day you break the pattern, no matter how small the break, is the day you begin to break the cycle. And once the cycle is broken, the future is no longer a rerun of the past. It's unwritten, waiting for you to choose the next step. We have been taught since childhood that comfort is the reward for hard work. Work hard now so you can relax later. Push yourself today so tomorrow will be easier. And on the surface, that makes sense. Who wouldn't want life to feel safe, predictable, and free from unnecessary struggle? But somewhere along the way, we confused comfort with progress. We started believing that once we reach a certain point, the goal is to stay there forever, to avoid risk, to avoid change, to avoid anything that makes us feel uncertain or awkward or out of control. And here's the problems. The moment we build our lives around protecting our comfort, we stop growing. It's easy to think of danger as something loud and obvious, a mistake that costs us everything, a failure that leaves us flat on the floor. But danger can also be quiet. It can sound like, this is good enough. Why risk it? It can feel like the familiar routine you never question. It can hide inside words like stable, safe, or comfortable. And because it feels good in the moment, we rarely see it for what it is, a trap. This is the trap of the familiar. It doesn't ask you to make a choice all at once. It works in small doses. It convinces you to make the same decision you made yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. It tells you there's no need to try something different because this is how things are done. But then slowly, without realizing it, you begin to build a life that is predictable, but not fulfilling. We often mistake movement for progress. You can run on a treadmill for hours and feel exhausted, but you haven't actually gone anywhere. The same thing happens in life. You can be busy every day, answering emails, attending meetings, fulfilling responsibilities, and yet still be standing in the exact same place you were years ago. Comfort gives us the illusion of stability, but in reality, it's often a slow slide into stagnation. I once met a man who had been in the same role at the same company for almost 20 years. When I asked if he enjoyed it, he shrugged. It's fine, he said. I know what to expect. It pays the bills. Why change? But as we spoke longer, I could hear the quiet resignation in his voice. He admitted that he'd once dreamed of doing something else entirely, but over the years, the comfort of a predictable paycheck had replaced that dream. He didn't lose his ambition overnight. Comfort slowly convinced him to stop trying. That's what makes comfort so dangerous. It doesn't feel like a cage. It feels like a soft blanket. And yet, it limits us just as much as fear does. Here's the truth no one likes to admit: growth never feels comfortable while it's happening. It's awkward, it's messy, it's full of uncertainty. Think about the first time you tried something completely new, a new job, a new skill, a new relationship. You didn't know what you were doing. You made mistakes. You felt out of place. But that's what made you grow. When you stay in comfort too long, you lose your tolerance for that feeling. You become allergic to uncertainty. You start to reject anything that makes you feel unsteady, forgetting that unsteadiness is the bridge between who you are now and who you want to become. The danger isn't just personal either. Entire organizations can fall into the comfort trap. Companies that were once innovative stop experimenting because they don't want to risk losing their position in the market. Teams that once pushed boundaries start relying on the same old strategies because worked before. And eventually something new, something bolder passes them by. Not because they were incapable, but because they chose comfort over evolution. The most ironic part is that we often avoid discomfort in the name of safety, but staying in the same place can be just as risky, sometimes more. A company that refuses to adapt to new technology will eventually be left behind. A person who avoids change may find themselves unprepared when change is forced upon them. Comfort feels like control, but in reality, it often leaves us less prepared for the future. The real question is not, how do I get more comfort? The real question is, am I willing to trade temporary discomfort for long-term growth? Because that's the trade-off every meaningful change requires. People often wait until discomfort comes to them. They wait until the job becomes unbearable, the relationship falls apart, or the opportunity passes by. They wait until life forces their hand, and then they have no choice but to adapt. But the ones who grow the most are the ones who choose discomfort before they're forced into it. They don't wait for a crisis to move. They step into unfamiliar territory when things still feel fine, because they know fine is the first step toward stuck. Think of an athlete training for a competition. If they only worked out when it felt easy, they would never improve. Strength comes from pushing the muscles to a point where they're challenged, where they ache, where they fail, and then doing it again. Life works the same way. If we want to build mental, emotional, or professional strength, we have to give ourselves the same kind of resistance training. Discomfort isn't the enemy. It's the signal that we're in new territory. It's proof that we're stretching beyond the boundaries of our old habits. The first time you try public speaking and your voice shakes, that's growth. The first time you make a bold decision and feel unsure if it will work, that's growth. The first time you step into a conversation you've been avoiding, that's growth. And yet comfort whispers to us, why bother? You don't need to do this. That's why breaking the comfort pattern requires intention. It requires building the habit of choosing situations that challenge you. The challenge doesn't always have to be monumental. Sometimes it's small. Taking a different route home. Talking to someone you wouldn't normally talk to. Saying yes to an invitation you'd usually turn down. The point isn't the size of the change, it's the fact that you're practicing the art of stepping outside the familiar. Because here's the truth, the more you choose discomfort, the more your capacity for it grows. What once terrified you becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes your new normal. And that's how you keep evolving instead of getting trapped in a cycle of sameness. There's a certain kind of courage required to let go of what feels safe in exchange for something unknown. People will question you. They'll say, why would you risk what you have? But they won't understand that the real risk is in staying exactly where you are. If you look back over your life, the moments you're proudest of aren't the times you played it safe. They're the moments you took a leap, even when you didn't know how it would turn out. They're the moments you leaned into uncertainty and came out stronger on the other side. So maybe the question we should be asking ourselves isn't, how do I make my life more comfortable? Maybe the question is, where have I chosen comfort at the expense of growth? Because that's where the opportunity lies. It's not about rejecting all comfort forever. It's about noticing when comfort has quietly turned into a cage. It's about asking, am I staying here because it's truly right for me, or because I'm afraid of what comes next? If the answer is fear, then the choice is clear. Step toward the discomfort. That's where the future is waiting. The truth is, comfort feels good today, but discomfort builds a better tomorrow. The day you choose discomfort over safety is the day you begin to rewrite your future. And the more often you make that choice, the less power comfort has over you. Because in the end, comfort will always promise you stability. But only discomfort can promise you transformation. We often imagine that big change in life comes from big action. Quitting your job, moving to another country, starting a company, ending a relationship. We picture a moment so dramatic it turns everything around. But in reality, most change doesn't start that way. It begins with something much smaller, a single shift in the way you choose to act in a familiar situation. Cycles don't end by accident. They end the moment you choose differently than you have before. And it's surprising how often that choice is so small, most people wouldn't even notice it from the outside. Think about a conversation you've had dozens of times. Maybe it's with a friend who always steers things toward the same topic. Maybe it's a colleague who always criticizes your ideas. Maybe it's a family member who knows exactly how to push your buttons. In the past, you've reacted the same way every time, defensive, withdrawn, impatient. But one day, for no particular reason, you choose to respond differently. You listen longer, you don't rise to the bait. You ask a question instead of making a point. And in that moment, something in the pattern breaks. It might not feel like much. There's no lightning bolt, no applause. But that one decision plants a seed. It proves to you that you're not locked into the old loop. You can act differently. And if you can do it once, you can do it again. The problem is, we underestimate the power of these small changes. We tell ourselves if it's not a huge leap, it's not worth it. But the truth is, cycles are made of tiny, repeated actions. So it makes sense that breaking them also starts with tiny, repeated changes. I once worked with a leader who was known for being reactive. If someone on his team made a mistake, his voice would rise, his frustration would spill out, and everyone around him would retreat into silence. It wasn't that he was a bad person. He cared deeply about his work. But the pattern was hurting his team. After a lot of reflection, he decided to try something different. The next time a mistake happened, he paused before speaking. He literally counted to 5 in his head, and in that space, his entire tone shifted. He asked questions instead of assigning blame. It was such a small adjustment, but it completely changed the conversation. Over time, that pause became his new pattern. Breaking a cycle isn't always about doing something grand. Sometimes it's about creating a moment of space where there was none before. That space gives you room to choose, and choice is where change begins. The other reason small shifts matter is because they're sustainable. Anyone can make a big, dramatic change for a week or two. But can you keep choosing differently day after day, especially when no one is watching, especially when it would be easier to slip back into what's familiar? That's where the real work happens. And here's the truth. Choosing differently doesn't always feel good at first. In fact, it often feels wrong. You're going against a groove that's been worn deep over years, maybe decades. Your instincts will try to pull you back into the old rhythm. You'll feel awkward, unnatural, even guilty. That's not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're doing something new. One of the most challenging parts of breaking a cycle is that other people are often invested in you staying the same. They're used to the role you play. They know how the script goes. And when you suddenly deliver a different line, you change the scene for everyone. Not everyone will like that. Some will push back. Some will try to pull you back into your old role. That's not because they don't care about you. It's because your change forces them to see themselves differently too. That's why courage matters more than confidence when you're starting out. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to be sure you can keep it up forever. You just need to be willing to take the first step, to make the first interruption, even if your voice shakes or your hands tremble. Confidence is a product of repetition, not a prerequisite for action. And once you've taken that step, something important happens. The old story loses a little bit of its power over you. You start to see that you're not at the mercy of your habits, your upbringing, or your past choices. You're not bound by the way it's always been. That's an incredibly freeing realization, and also a little terrifying, because if you can choose differently, then you're also responsible for what happens next. It's tempting to look for the perfect moment to break a pattern, to tell yourself, I'll do it when things calm down, or I'll do it when I feel more prepared. But the perfect moment never arrives. Life doesn't line itself up neatly so you can make changes without disruption. The best time to start is exactly when you notice the pattern. Even if it's messy, even if you feel unready. I remember talking to a woman who had spent years in relationships where she felt unappreciated. She kept ending up with partners who treated her the same way. At first, she thought it was bad luck. Eventually, she realized she was accepting less than she deserved because it was familiar. She told me that the first time she said no to a partner's dismissive comment, something she would have let slide before, it felt like the smallest act. But she said it was the moment she began to feel her worth. That one choice made the next one easier. And slowly, the cycle she thought was inevitable began to dissolve. The shift doesn't have to be visible to anyone else for it to be powerful. It doesn't have to make headlines in your life. It just has to be consistent. And that consistency comes from understanding that change is a process, not an event. When you break a pattern, the old one doesn't vanish instantly. It will try to reassert itself. It will show up in moments when you're tired, stressed, or distracted. That's why awareness is key. You have to notice the pattern as it starts, not after you've already fallen into it. And when you do fall back into it, because the goal isn't to feel defeated, it's to recover faster, to choose differently the next time, and the next until the new way becomes natural. It's like turning a massive ship. You don't spin the wheel once and instantly change direction. You apply steady pressure over time, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the course shifts. One day you look up and you realize you're headed somewhere entirely different. What's powerful about small changes is that they compound. One different choice leads to another and then another. Over time, the person you become is shaped not by a single moment of transformation, but by hundreds of tiny decisions that each broke the cycle in some way. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require you to have everything figured out. You don't have to see the whole path ahead. You just have to see the next choice and decide to make it different from the last time. And here's something worth remembering: cycles don't just exist in our personal lives. They exist in teams, in organizations, in communities. Groups can get stuck in patterns just as much as individuals can, repeating the same approaches, making the same assumptions, avoiding the same conversations. The same principle applies there too. Change starts with one person making one different choice. Maybe that's speaking up in a meeting when everyone else is nodding along. Maybe it's asking a question no one has asked before. Maybe it's refusing to do things the way they've always been done when you know there's a better way. That's how momentum begins, with one break in the rhythm. And once that break happens, it creates permission for others to choose differently too. Your choice can become the catalyst for change far beyond yourself. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that waiting for someone else to break the cycle rarely works. We all hope for the perfect leader, the perfect moment, the perfect push. But more often than not, change comes when an ordinary person makes an extraordinary decision in an ordinary moment. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to get it perfect. You just have to do something, anything, that breaks the loop. Because once you've proven to yourself that you can, the cycle no longer owns you. And that's the real turning point. The moment you realize you have a choice, you're free. The moment you take that choice, you're changed. And the moment you repeat it, you're on your way to a new pattern entirely. The day you choose differently is the day the story starts to change. And once the story changes, so does everything else. We tend to put a lot of pressure on the idea of confidence. We imagine that the people who take bold action, the ones who step into the unknown, are the ones who are absolutely certain of themselves. We tell ourselves that once we feel confident, then we'll take the leap. But confidence is not the fuel for action. It's the result of it. Waiting for confidence before you act is like waiting to get stronger before you start lifting weights. The whole point is that the strength comes from the lifting, not before it. Courage, on the other hand, is different. Courage is doing the thing without knowing how it will turn out. Courage is moving even when you feel unready. And when it comes to breaking a cycle, courage is far more important than confidence. The challenge is that courage is uncomfortable by design. It requires you to step into situations where you cannot predict the outcome. Your brain will warn you of every possible way things might go wrong. You'll feel exposed, vulnerable, even foolish. And in a world where we're conditioned to avoid failure and protect our image, those feelings are hard to welcome. But this is the paradox. The discomfort of courage is the exact thing that creates the freedom we're looking for. Think about the first time you learned something completely new, maybe riding a bike, speaking a new language, starting a job in a field you'd never worked in before. You didn't start with confidence. You started with awkwardness, mistakes, uncertainty. And each time you got back on the bike, or stumbled through a sentence, or figured out a small part of your role, your confidence grew. But none of that would have happened without the first clumsy step. When we're trapped in a pattern, it's easy to think the solution is to wait until we're ready. We want to feel strong before we try something different. But readiness is not a feeling, it's a decision. At some point, you choose to act without proof that it will work, without assurance that you won't fall back into the old loop. That choice is courage. I once knew a man who had spent his entire career in one industry. He wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't inspired either. He had an idea for something completely different, a small business he'd dreamed of starting for years. But every time he thought about it, he told himself the same thing: I'm not ready yet. He wanted to have the perfect plan, the perfect funding, the perfect timing. And years went by. The dream stayed alive in his mind, but never made it into reality. Eventually, a friend asked him a simple question: do you need more preparation, or do you need more courage? It was the question that shifted everything. He realized he'd been mistaking his lack of courage for a lack of readiness. So he took a small step, not quitting his job, not risking everything, just one small action to move his idea forward. It wasn't a big leap, but it was enough to break the inertia. Courage doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean throwing yourself into the deep end without a life jacket. It means taking a step that feels just beyond what's comfortable. If you stretch too far, you burn out. If you don't stretch at all, you stay stuck. The art is finding the edge, the place where you're challenged, but still able to move forward. The reason courage is so critical in breaking cycles is because patterns survive by convincing you that the known is safer than the unknown. Your brain loves predictability. It would rather deal with a familiar problem than face an unfamiliar possibility. Even when the familiar thing is holding you back, it feels secure because you know how it works. Courage disrupts that logic. It says, I don't know what's next, but I'm moving anyway. In relationships, courage might mean saying something you've never dared to say before. At work, it might mean volunteering for a project you don't feel fully qualified for. Personally, it might mean setting a boundary that scares you because you've always been the one who says yes. The specific action matters less than the fact that you're stepping into a space where you cannot guarantee the outcome. And here's the thing about outcomes. The first